Nestled on the outskirts of a bustling city, the quaint neighborhood of Maple Grove is the kind of place that seems perfect for families and retirees alike. The sun-drenched streets are lined with charming houses, each meticulously maintained, their colorful gardens bursting with blooms that sway gently in the spring breeze. Children ride their bicycles on the sidewalks, and neighbors exchange warm greetings as they walk their dogs or tend to their lawns. But beneath this idyllic surface lies a complex web of relationships governed by the ever-watchful eye of the Homeowners Association, or HOA, a powerful force that many residents have come to both rely upon and resent. The HOA was established with good intentions to maintain property values, ensure aesthetic cohesion, and foster a sense of community pride. However, as is often the case, the very rules designed to protect the neighborhood became sources of contention. The association's rigid guidelines dictate everything from lawn height to paint colors, leading to a culture where even the smallest infraction could ignite heated disputes among neighbors. In Maple Grove, one name has become synonymous with these conflicts: Karen Thompson. Karen is not just any resident. She is the self-appointed enforcer of HOA rules. With her clipboard perpetually in hand and a critical eye for detail, she patrols the neighborhood like a hawk. Her presence looms large in community gatherings, where opinions on landscaping choices or fence heights often overshadow any semblance of camaraderie. To some, she is seen as a guardian of order. To others, she is an overbearing nuisance who thrives on micromanaging others' lives. The dynamics among residents are fraught with tension as Karen's zeal for enforcement clashes with the more laid-back attitudes of her neighbors. Many have learned to tread lightly around her, carefully adhering to every regulation lest they incur her wrath. Others have grown weary of her constant vigilance and dare to push back against her authority. Yet, no matter which side they fall on, everyone agrees that living in Maple Grove has become a delicate balancing act between compliance and rebellion. It was within this charged atmosphere that I found myself at odds with Karen, a conflict that would escalate dramatically and change the trajectory of my life in ways I could never have imagined. As someone who valued community spirit and open dialogue, I'd always tried to engage constructively with Karen's criticisms. I mowed my lawn religiously and adhered to all HOA guidelines regarding property appearance. But Karen's scrutiny was relentless. It seemed no matter how hard I tried, there was always something she could nitpick. Things came to a head one fateful afternoon when I returned home from work, only to find my power lines lying in disarray on my front yard like defeated soldiers after battle. Confused and alarmed, I quickly pieced together what had happened. I had received a notice from the HOA stating that my backyard tree was out of compliance due to its encroaching branches overhanging common areas. They demanded immediate action or face fines. In an effort to resolve the issue swiftly and without confrontation, I had planned to call an electrician for help but hadn't yet gotten around to it. However, it seemed Karen had taken matters into her own hands while I was at work. In an act that would soon become infamous in our neighborhood lore, she had decided to cut my power lines herself, an extreme measure that not only caused significant damage but also left me without electricity for hours on end. As I stood there in disbelief, grappling with both anger and confusion about how someone could go so far over what should have been a simple communication regarding property maintenance, I realized this was more than just an isolated incident. It was a manifestation of the tensions that had been brewing in Maple Grove for far too long. The incident marked a turning point, not only for me, but for the entire community, as it forced residents to confront the implications of Karen's actions and what it meant for our lives together in this once peaceful neighborhood. No longer were we merely passive observers. We were now players in an escalating saga that would reveal itself in ways none of us could have anticipated. The stage was set for confrontation, and soon enough, everyone would learn just how far Karen's obsession with enforcing HOA rules would lead her, and just what consequences awaited those who crossed her path. My name is Alex Harper, and I've lived in Maple Grove for over 5 years. Moving here was a dream come true for me, a chance to settle down in a friendly neighborhood where the air was fresh, the streets were safe, and the sense of community felt palpable. I had grown up in a bustling city where noise and chaos were the norm, so the tranquility of Maple Grove was a welcome relief. I imagined myself planting roots here, maybe even raising a family one day. Initially, my relationship with the community was warm and inviting. Neighbors exchanged pleasantries as they strolled by my home, and I quickly became acquainted with many of them through casual chats at the local park or during neighborhood barbecues. I enjoyed these interactions, believing they fostered a sense of belonging. We had our quirks, every neighborhood does, but it felt like a close-knit group that looked out for one another. However, my idyllic experience began to shift when I encountered the HOA. At first glance, the HOA seemed like a benign entity designed to keep our community thriving. They organized seasonal events and maintained common areas, which I appreciated. However, as time passed and I became more aware of their stringent regulations, I realized that their influence extended far beyond what I had anticipated. Suddenly, there were rules about everything: how high our grass could grow, the types of fences we could install, even the color of our front doors. For someone like me who valued personal expression and creativity in my home, these regulations felt restrictive. I remember when I decided to paint my mailbox a vibrant blue to add a touch of personality to my front yard. It seemed harmless enough, after all, it was just a mailbox, but Karen wasted no time in reporting me to the HOA for noncompliance. Though it may seem trivial now, that encounter marked my first taste of the friction that would come to define my relationship with her. Karen Thompson was relentless in her pursuit of rule enforcement. With her meticulous nature and unwavering commitment to HOA standards, she became both feared and resented by many residents. She embodied what some would call an HOA Karen, a term that had begun circulating among neighbors who felt stifled by her ever-watchful gaze. While some residents may have appreciated her dedication to maintaining order, others found her overbearing and intrusive. I tried to maintain an amicable relationship with her despite my frustrations. After all, we live in the same neighborhood and were both committed to its well-being, at least in theory. Whenever she approached me with critiques about my property or suggestions on how to improve compliance, I listened politely and nodded along, hoping it might quell her demands. But it was never enough for Karen. She always found something else to nitpick. One particularly memorable encounter occurred during a neighborhood cleanup day organized by the HOA. As we all gathered to pick up litter from the nearby park, Karen cornered me about my flower bed, a bright assortment of colors that I had lovingly curated over several seasons. She informed me that some flowers were inappropriate because they attracted bees and could pose a danger to children playing in the area. While her intentions might have been genuine, concern for children's safety, I couldn't help but feel frustrated by her unsolicited advice. Despite these challenges with Karen, I remained optimistic about living in Maple Grove. I genuinely believed that engaging with my neighbors and finding common ground would lead us all toward harmony, even if Karen's presence often made that path feel rocky. However, as time went on and tensions escalated between us over seemingly petty issues, I realized that my patience was wearing thin. Eventually, it became clear that Karen's obsession with enforcing rules extended beyond minor disagreements. It was a reflection of deeper issues within our community dynamics. Her actions not only affected me, but began to create rifts among other residents who were caught in the crossfire of her relentless scrutiny. As I navigated this increasingly tumultuous relationship with Karen and learned more about how entrenched she was within our neighborhood's fabric, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had to give. A tipping point was on the horizon. Little did I know how soon that moment would come, or how dramatically it would alter my life in Maple Grove forever. The day started like any other, with the sun peeking through my bedroom window and the soft sound of the neighborhood waking up around me. I brewed my morning coffee, savoring the rich aroma as I glanced out at my yard, where the flowers I had painstakingly tended to were beginning to bloom. There was a sense of peace in the air, a fleeting moment of normalcy that would soon be shattered by an unexpected turn of events. As I prepared for work, I received an email from the HOA reminding residents about upcoming inspections. My heart sank a little as I recalled my previous encounters with Karen and her unwavering commitment to enforcing every rule. I had done my best to comply, but with someone like her watching over us, it felt like a constant battle. After all, I had just spent hours trimming back the branches of my tree, which had encroached on common areas, hoping to avoid any further issues. Little did I know that my efforts were about to become irrelevant. Later that afternoon, I returned home from work, exhausted from a long day. As I pulled into my driveway, a sense of dread washed over me when I noticed something amiss. The yard looked different. There was an unnatural stillness in the air that seemed to hang heavily around me. I stepped out of my car and walked closer to investigate. That's when I saw them, my power lines lying in a tangled mess across my lawn. My heart raced as disbelief turned into shock. How could this have happened? I frantically scanned the area, searching for answers. My mind raced with possibilities until it landed on one undeniable truth. Karen must have been involved. In my panic, I recalled the HOA's recent notice regarding my backyard tree. Although I had planned to call an electrician to address the situation properly, it seemed that Karen had taken matters into her own hands while I was at work. The realization gnawed at me, She had cut my power lines herself without any warning or permission. A mix of anger and frustration surged through me as I dialed the electric company, barely able to articulate what had happened between deep breaths. They assured me they would send someone out as quickly as possible, but waiting felt like an eternity. As I stood there on my front lawn, staring at the severed lines and feeling utterly powerless, both literally and figuratively, I couldn't help but feel violated. How could someone go so far over what should have been a simple communication about property maintenance? The minutes dragged on, and memories of past encounters with Karen flooded back. Her relentless scrutiny felt more personal now. She was no longer just an HOA enforcer, but a disruptor of my life. The violation weighed heavily upon me, not just for the loss of power, but for the invasion of my personal space and autonomy. When the electric company finally arrived, they assessed the damage and confirmed what I already knew. Karen's actions had caused significant disruption not only to my electrical service, but possibly to neighboring properties as well. "This is serious," one technician said, shaking his head as he surveyed the scene. "Cutting power lines is no small matter." As they worked to restore my electricity, emotions boiled over inside me. Anger transformed into determination. This wasn't just about losing power for a few hours. It was about standing up against someone who believed she could dictate how we lived our lives in Maple Grove. Once the technicians finished their work and power was restored, I knew that this incident could not go unaddressed. As night fell and darkness enveloped my home once more, this time illuminated by flickering lights, I resolved to take action against Karen's reckless behavior. That evening, fueled by adrenaline and indignation, I drafted a letter outlining what had transpired and sent it not only to her, but also to the HOA board members who had long overlooked her increasingly erratic enforcement methods. This incident was more than just a petty squabble. It was a violation that demanded accountability. Little did I know that this letter would set off a chain reaction in our community, a confrontation that would escalate tensions among neighbors and force everyone to reconsider their roles within Maple Grove's delicate ecosystem of rules and relationships. What began as an ordinary day was now transformed into a turning point in my life, and in the life of our neighborhood, one from which neither Karen nor I would emerge unscathed. The aftermath of the incident weighed heavily on me, both physically and emotionally. As I sat in my living room that night, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows against the walls, I couldn't shake the sense of vulnerability that had settled over my home. The electricity had been restored, but the damage was far more profound than just a few tangled wires on my lawn. The power line cut had not only left me without electricity for hours, but also disrupted my entire routine. I relied on my evening rituals to wind down after a long day, showering, cooking dinner, and enjoying some quiet time with a good book or a favorite show. But that night, everything felt off balance. The familiar hum of appliances was replaced by an unsettling silence that echoed through my house. Without power, I had resorted to scavenging candles from drawers and rummaging through the pantry for snacks that didn't require cooking. As I moved around the dimly lit rooms, frustration bubbled up within me. This was more than just a temporary inconvenience. It felt like a blatant disregard for my home and well-being. The power outage had thrown off my entire evening, disrupting not just my comfort but also my mental state. I could hardly concentrate on anything else as thoughts swirled in my mind about how this had happened and who was responsible. In the days that followed, the fallout from Karen's reckless actions became increasingly evident. I noticed minor damages around my property that had gone unaddressed, a broken garden trellis from where the power lines had fallen, scattered debris that now lay strewn across my yard like remnants of a storm. I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of violation. This wasn't just about lost power. It was about the sanctity of my home being compromised by someone who believed she had the right to dictate how I managed my property. But it didn't stop there. My relationships with neighbors began to fray as well. The incident quickly became a topic of conversation at community gatherings and on social media platforms. Residents who had once been friendly acquaintances were now divided into factions, those who sympathized with me and those who viewed Karen as an unwavering enforcer of HOA rules. What should have been a simple matter of compliance had escalated into a community-wide debate about authority, respect, and personal boundaries. The emotional toll was exhausting. Each time I encountered another neighbor in passing, I braced myself for potential conflict or awkwardness. Some offered their support and expressed outrage at Karen's actions, while others seemed hesitant to take a stand against her, fearing retribution or judgment themselves. It felt like walking through a minefield, where every conversation could lead to an explosion of tension. One evening while standing in my mailbox, a simple act made complicated by recent events, I ran into Mrs. Jenkins from 2 doors down. She approached cautiously, her eyes darting nervously as if she were afraid someone might overhear our exchange. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened," she whispered, glancing around as if Karen might appear out of nowhere. "Thank you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside me. "I appreciate your support." But Mrs. Jenkins hesitated before continuing. "I've heard some people say that cutting your lines was extreme, but then again, rules are rules." Her words hung in the air like a bitter aftertaste. It was moments like these that intensified my frustration. How could anyone defend such reckless behavior? My home was not merely an extension of HOA regulations. It was where I built my life, where memories were made and cherished. As days turned into weeks, I found myself caught in an emotional whirlwind, a mix of anger and determination fueled by the knowledge that something needed to change in our community dynamics. The consequences of Karen's actions reached beyond damaged property. They strained relationships and disrupted the very fabric of what it meant to live in Maple Grove. With each passing day, it became clearer that this conflict would not resolve itself quietly or easily. I knew that taking action against Karen was essential, not only for myself but for everyone in our neighborhood who deserved to feel safe and respected within their own homes. The urgency was palpable. It was time to stand up against the oppressive atmosphere Karen had created and reclaim our community spirit. Little did I know that this journey would take unexpected turns and lead us all toward an inevitable confrontation, one that would force us to reckon with the consequences of our choices and redefine what it meant to live together in harmony amidst chaos. As the days turned into weeks, the emotional toll of Karen's actions continued to weigh heavily on me. It became increasingly clear that I could not simply brush this incident aside. It was a violation of my rights and an affront to my sense of security within my own home. I had tried to be patient and understanding, but Karen's reckless behavior had crossed a line, and I felt compelled to take a stand. The decision to pursue legal action was not one I took lightly. I spent countless nights tossing and turning, contemplating the implications of such a move. Would it escalate tensions further within the community? Would it ultimately lead to isolation from my neighbors, many of whom had been supportive but were now caught in the crossfire? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that justice needed to be served. After much deliberation, I reached out to a local attorney who specialized in homeowners association disputes. The consultation was eye-opening. As I sat across from him in his office, surrounded by bookshelves filled with legal texts, I began to feel a sense of empowerment. He listened attentively as I recounted the entire incident, the power line cut, the aftermath, and the emotional turmoil that followed. With each detail I shared, I felt the weight of my frustration begin to lift. "This isn't just about property damage," he said firmly after hearing my story. "It's about accountability. You have every right to protect your home and seek compensation for what you've endured." His words resonated with me. They ignited a determination that had been simmering beneath the surface. Together, we began gathering evidence to build a case against Karen and the HOA. We meticulously documented everything: photographs of the damaged power lines, videos of my yard post-incident showing the chaotic aftermath, and copies of emails exchanged with HOA members regarding complaints about Karen's behavior. Each piece of evidence became a building block in our pursuit of justice. As we compiled our case, I found myself reliving every moment of frustration and anger associated with Karen's actions. It was emotionally draining. Each reminder brought back feelings of violation and helplessness. There were times when I questioned whether this was worth it, whether pursuing legal action would only add fuel to the fire rather than provide resolution. But deep down, I knew that what had happened needed to be addressed. My attorney helped me navigate the complexities of HOA law and explained what potential claims could arise from Karen's actions. We discussed possible outcomes, financial compensation for damages incurred due to her reckless behavior, and perhaps even changes in how the HOA functioned moving forward. The thought of holding her accountable sparked a flicker of hope within me, a belief that change might be possible. Yet despite this newfound sense of purpose, doubts lingered. Would the community rally behind me or turn their backs? Would taking legal action make me an outcast among neighbors who might fear retaliation from Karen? These questions haunted me as I prepared for what lay ahead. One day, as I gathered more evidence in my living room, I received an unexpected message from Mrs. Jenkins, an email expressing her support for my decision to pursue legal action against Karen. She shared her own frustrations with how rigidly Karen enforced HOA rules, indicating she would be willing to testify if necessary. Her message reignited my conviction and reminded me that there were others who felt similarly trapped under Karen's watchful eye. With renewed determination, I moved forward with filing official papers against both Karen and the HOA itself. As my attorney submitted the complaint, a rush of adrenaline surged through me, a mix of anxiety and empowerment as we set this process into motion. But even as I took these steps toward justice, I understood that this journey would be fraught with challenges. Legal battles can be prolonged and emotionally taxing. There was no guarantee that things would go according to plan or that I would emerge victorious. Nevertheless, each step taken felt like reclaiming my voice, an act of defiance against someone who had tried to dictate how I lived in my own home. Little did I know how far-reaching this decision would be, not just for me, but for everyone in Maple Grove who longed for harmony amidst chaos. The stage was set for what would become an epic confrontation between individual rights and community rules, a showdown that would force us all to confront difficult truths about our neighborhood dynamics and redefine what it meant to live together in peace. The battle for justice had begun, and there was no turning back now. As news of my decision to take legal action against Karen spread through Maple Grove, the atmosphere in our once unified community shifted dramatically. What had been a peaceful neighborhood was now engulfed in discussions, debates, and, unfortunately, divisions. The incident with the power lines had become a flashpoint that revealed the underlying tensions that simmered beneath our facade of harmony. Supporters began to rally around me almost immediately. Neighbors who had previously hesitated to voice their opinions about Karen's rigid enforcement found their voices emboldened by my actions. Mrs. Jenkins, who had already reached out with her support, organized an impromptu gathering at her house for those who felt similarly frustrated by the HOA's heavy-handed approach. That evening, a mix of residents arrived. Some were friends I had known for years, while others were acquaintances whose names I barely remembered. As we gathered in Mrs. Jenkins' living room, a sense of camaraderie filled the space. We shared our stories about encounters with Karen, each tale amplifying our collective frustration and igniting a fire within us. "I can't believe it took something like this for us to come together," one neighbor remarked as she recounted her own experiences of being chastised for minor landscaping choices. Laughter mingled with nods of agreement as we realized just how many of us felt stifled under the weight of Karen's scrutiny. However, not everyone was on board with the growing resistance. A faction of residents remained loyal to Karen and her unwavering commitment to the HOA's rules. They argued that her actions, while perhaps excessive, stemmed from a desire to maintain order and uphold community standards. One evening at the local community center, a heated debate erupted among attendees during a board meeting. "I think we should be grateful for Karen," shouted Mark, a longtime resident who prided himself on his perfectly manicured lawn. "Without her vigilance, we'd have chaos. We need rules to keep our property values up." His words struck a chord with others who fear that challenging Karen would lead to an erosion of our community's standards. The divide between neighbors became more pronounced as sides were drawn. Supporters of Karen began circulating rumors about my intentions, questioning my motives and painting me as someone looking to disrupt the peace rather than restore it. Whispers of dissent echoed in the aisles of the grocery store and during school drop-offs as people exchanged knowing glances and hushed conversations. Meanwhile, my supporters grew more vocal in their opposition to Karen's reign over our community. A few brave souls even began attending HOA meetings with signs advocating for change. "Community shouldn't be about control," read one sign held high by a woman I recognized from down the street. The sight filled me with hope. Perhaps this was the catalyst we needed to create real change within Maple Grove. Yet amidst all this support came feelings of isolation and anxiety. With each passing day, I felt increasingly like an outsider in my own neighborhood. I could sense the tension when I walked my dog past familiar homes or ran into neighbors at the local park. The smiles often didn't reach their eyes anymore. Some were friendly but distant, while others outright avoided eye contact. It was disheartening to see friendships strained over what should have been a straightforward issue about property maintenance. The emotional toll weighed heavily on me as I navigated this new reality. While I appreciated the backing from my fellow residents who stood against Karen, I also mourned the loss of what had once been a close-knit community. The divisions ran deep. It wasn't merely about power lines anymore. It was about differing perspectives on individual rights versus collective responsibility. Throughout all this turmoil, I found solace in conversations with other supporters who share their hopes for change, not just for me, but for everyone in Maple Grove who felt oppressed by overly strict regulations and fear-based governance. Our discussion centered around creating a more balanced approach within the HOA that allowed for personal expression without sacrificing community standards. Still, I couldn't shake off the sense of unease that hung over us like dark clouds ready to unleash a storm. The conflict with Karen had transformed not only my life but also reshaped our neighborhood dynamic forever. As we prepared for what lay ahead, both legally and socially, I knew that this confrontation would test our resolve and ultimately determine how we would move forward together as community. With each passing day leading up to the next HOA meeting, and possibly even court proceedings, I braced myself for what was sure to be an emotionally charged showdown that would challenge everything we thought we knew about living together in Maple Grove. The stakes were high, justice was calling, but at what price would it come? As I prepared for the next steps in my legal battle against Karen and the HOA, the investigation into the incident began in earnest. It was a process that will be fraught with tension and uncertainty, but I knew it was necessary to uncover the truth about what had happened. The stakes were high, and a thorough investigation would be crucial in holding Karen accountable for her actions. The first step involved gathering statements from neighbors who had witnessed the incident or had knowledge of Karen's behavior leading up to it. My attorney and I decided to conduct these interviews ourselves, believing that hearing first-hand accounts could strengthen our case. Armed with a list of questions and a notepad, I reached out to those who had expressed their support during the community gatherings. One by one, neighbors shared their experiences. Some had seen Karen lurking around my property on the day of the incident, while others recounted instances where she had crossed lines in her enforcement of HOA rules. Each interview revealed new layers of frustration and resentment toward her authoritarian approach, reinforcing my belief that I wasn't alone in this fight. It became clear that many residents were fed up with the oppressive atmosphere her actions had created. One neighbor, Mr. Thompson, a retired school teacher, recounted how he had once received a stern letter from Karen regarding his choice of garden decor. She called it unsightly and warned me to take it down or face fines, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. I couldn't believe it. It was just a couple of gnomes. But that's how she operates. No compassion, just rules. His story mirrored my own experiences and added weight to our argument. In addition to gathering witness statements, we arranged for an official inspection of my property to assess the damage caused by the power line cut. A licensed contractor visited to examine not only the immediate area where the lines had fallen, but also any potential long-term impacts on my landscaping and property value. The contractor's report confirmed what I already suspected. There was significant damage to my garden trellis and potential risks associated with exposed wires. Armed with these findings, we prepared to submit everything to the HOA as part of our complaint against Karen. However, the HOA's response was less than reassuring. They convened a special meeting to address the incident, but seemed more focused on protecting their image than finding a solution. Karen attended this meeting, sitting tall with an air of defiance as she defended her actions. During discussions, I watched as board members hesitated to confront her directly. Instead, they tiptoed around the issue, worried about how taking sides might affect their standing in the community. It was evident that Karen held considerable sway over them. They were reluctant to upset the status quo, even when faced with overwhelming evidence against her behavior. The atmosphere in that meeting was tense as residents began voicing their concerns about Karen's enforcement methods. Some argued she acted out of concern for community standards, while others questioned how far those standards should go at the expense of individual rights. The division among neighbors bubbled beneath the surface, creating a palpable tension in the room. Eventually, it became clear that my complaint would not be addressed adequately within the HOA's framework. It felt as though they were stalling for time, unwilling to take decisive action against one of their own members despite mounting evidence that suggested misconduct. Frustration bubbled within me. How could they ignore what was right in front of them? In spite of this bureaucratic resistance, I found solace in knowing that I wasn't alone in this battle. The support from other residents who were fed up with Karen's antics continued to grow stronger each day. Their stories helped fuel my determination as we collectively navigated this maze of bureaucracy together. As weeks turned into months and tensions escalated further within our community, I realized that pursuing justice would require not only persistence but also courage, both on my part and from those willing to stand alongside me. The investigation had opened Pandora's box within Maple Grove. We were now faced with confronting deep-rooted issues surrounding authority, accountability, and what it meant to truly live together as neighbors. With each passing day bringing new developments and more interactions with fellow residents, there was no turning back now. The investigation into Karen's actions was just beginning, but one thing was certain. It would reveal far more than just a simple dispute over power lines. It would challenge our entire community to reevaluate its principles and priorities moving forward. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face whatever came next in pursuit of justice for myself and for everyone who dared to dream of a better Maple Grove. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety as I stepped into the courthouse. The imposing building loomed over me, its stark facade contrasting sharply with the warmth of Maple Grove. I had envisioned this moment countless times, each scenario playing out in my mind with varying degrees of triumph or despair. Today would determine not only my fate but also the integrity of our community. As I entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with tension. My attorney and I took our seats at the plaintiff's table, while Karen sat across from us, flanked by her own legal counsel, an intimidating duo dressed in sharp suits that screamed confidence. She wore a smug expression that made my stomach churn, a stark reminder of how much was at stake. The judge entered, and a hush fell over the room as he took his seat. After brief introductions and procedural matters were addressed, the proceedings began. The judge's voice cut through the silence as he instructed us to present our case. My attorney stood first, outlining the events leading up to the incident, the power line cut, the emotional and physical damage it caused, and Karen's history of overstepping her bounds as an HOA enforcer. He painted a picture of a community at odds with its own rules and regulations, emphasizing how Karen's actions were not just reckless but emblematic of a larger issue within Maple Grove. As we presented our evidence, photographs of the damaged property, witness statements from supportive neighbors, and even videos showing Karen lurking around my yard, the tension in the room intensified. Each piece seemed to resonate with the judge. His furrowed brow suggested he grasped the gravity of what had transpired. Next came my turn to testify. My legs felt like jelly as I approached the witness stand, but I was determined to share my story. I spoke about my love for Maple Grove, how I had envisioned a peaceful life here, a refuge from chaos. With each word I spoke, I felt the weight of my emotions pour out. I described how Karen's actions had not only disrupted my home but shattered my sense of security within the community. As I recounted the moments after discovering the severed power lines, my confusion, my anger, and my resolve to seek justice, I could see heads nodding among supporters who had come to show their solidarity. But across from me, Karen's expression remained steely. She leaned back in her chair as if dismissing my pain. When it was her turn to take the stand, Karen exuded an air of confidence that was infuriating. She presented herself as a concerned neighbor who merely wanted to maintain order in our community. I acted in what I believed was the best interest of Maple Grove, she asserted with unwavering conviction. The tree was a hazard, and it needed to be addressed. Her testimony was riddled with half-truths and contradictions as she attempted to rewrite history. I felt my blood boil at her audacity. How could she claim concern for safety while taking such extreme measures? As she spoke, it became evident that her version of events was meant to portray me as someone who didn't care about community standards, a narrative that simply wasn't true. As evidence from both sides unfolded, I became increasingly aware of how deeply divided our community had become over this issue. Supporters nodded along with my attorney's arguments, while others looked skeptical at Karen's claims. The courtroom felt like a microcosm of Maple Grove itself, each side entrenched in their beliefs about authority and personal responsibility. The most pivotal moment came when one of my neighbors took the stand to testify on my behalf. Mrs. Jenkins recounted her support during previous community gatherings and shared her own experiences with Karen's overreach. Her words carried weight. They echoed sentiments that many others felt but hadn't voiced publicly until now. "We should be able to enjoy our homes without fear of being harassed," she declared passionately. As Mrs. Jenkins' testimony concluded, I could feel momentum shifting in our favor. It seemed like a turning point in this battle for justice. But just when things seemed to be going well for us, Karen's attorney launched a scathing cross-examination designed to undermine both my credibility and Mrs. Jenkins. It was brutal, and each question aimed to reduce our experiences to mere exaggerations or petty grievances. My heart raced as I watched them twist our words into something unrecognizable. It felt like an assault on everything we'd fought for. When the session finally adjourned for the day, exhaustion washed over me like a wave. The trial had only just begun, but already it had tested every ounce of resolve within me. As we left the courthouse, surrounded by supporters who offered words of encouragement and solidarity, I couldn't help but reflect on how much this fight meant, not just for me, but for everyone in Maple Grove who longed for a sense of fairness and respect within our community. The road ahead would be challenging, we were still far from reaching a resolution or achieving justice against Karen's actions. Yet amidst all uncertainty lay hope. Hope that together we could redefine what it meant to live in harmony, standing up against those who sought to impose their will on others without accountability. Little did I know then just how pivotal this moment would be in changing not only my life, but also reshaping our entire neighborhood's future forever. The day of the verdict dawned with an air of palpable tension. As I entered the courthouse, my heart raced with a mix of hope and dread. The proceedings had been arduous, filled with emotional testimonies and contentious cross-examinations, but now we were on the brink of resolution. I could feel the weight of my community's expectations resting on my shoulders. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by supporters who had rallied behind me throughout this journey. They whispered words of encouragement, but I could also sense their anxiety mirrored my own. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about our neighborhood, our rights as homeowners, and the kind of community we wanted to live in. The judge entered the courtroom, and silence enveloped us as he took his seat. He glanced down at the notes in front of him, then looked up with a measured expression. After careful consideration of the evidence presented and testimonies heard, he began, pausing for dramatic effect as he scanned the room. My breath caught in my throat. I hereby rule in favor of the plaintiff. A wave of relief washed over me, mixed with disbelief. The gavel slammed down, echoing through the courtroom like a final shot heard round the world. I could hardly process what had just happened as my supporters erupted into quiet cheers, while Karen sat frozen in her chair, her face pale and expressionless. The judge continued to outline his reasoning. He noted that while maintaining community standards was important, they should not come at the expense of individual rights or safety. He condemned Karen's actions as reckless and unacceptable, emphasizing that cutting power lines without proper authorization was not only dangerous, but also an egregious violation of trust among neighbors. As he detailed the consequences for Karen and the HOA, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The judge imposed a hefty fine on Karen for damages caused by her actions, enough to cover not only my repair costs, but also additional penalties for emotional distress inflicted on me during this ordeal. It was a significant victory that felt like justice served after months of turmoil. But as I absorbed the verdict and its implications, I couldn't help but notice the mixed reactions from those present in the courtroom. Many supporters were elated. They exchanged hugs and congratulatory remarks, celebrating what felt like a monumental step toward reclaiming our community's integrity. Yet others exchanged glances filled with concern. Karen's loyal followers looked disheartened, some even angry, as they whispered among themselves about how this ruling could disrupt their vision of order in Maple Grove. As we exited the courthouse, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment mingled with an unsettling awareness of what lay ahead. Yes, I had won my case against Karen, but what did this mean for our neighborhood? Would this verdict lead to a more harmonious environment or further divide us? In the days following the verdict, discussions buzzed throughout Maple Grove. The news quickly spread through social media and local gatherings, igniting debates about accountability within our HOA structure. Some residents celebrated my victory as a win for individual rights, while others voiced concerns about what they perceived as a threat to community standards and order. Karen's reaction was one of defiance. She refused to accept responsibility for her actions even after facing legal consequences. In private conversations with her supporters, she framed herself as a victim, a martyr for maintaining order against unruly neighbors who didn't respect rules meant to protect property values. This narrative only fueled further divisions among residents. Supporters rallied around me and called for reform within the HOA, advocating for clearer guidelines that balanced individual freedoms with collective responsibility. Others feared that any change would lead to chaos, a breakdown of standards that would devalue our homes. As I reflected on these developments, I wrestled with mixed feelings about justice and community dynamics. Yes, I felt vindicated. Yes, I had taken a stand against oppressive behavior that had disrupted my life and threatened my home. But at what cost? My triumph came at the expense of unity among neighbors, a price I hadn't fully anticipated. Ultimately, I understood that while I had achieved personal justice, it was merely a stepping stone toward addressing larger issues within Maple Grove. The conflict with Karen had exposed cracks in our community's foundation, cracks that needed healing if we were to move forward together. With newfound resolve, I committed myself to fostering dialogue among residents, inviting open discussions about how we could reshape our HOA into something more inclusive and fair while still respecting property rights. The journey ahead will be challenging. Change rarely comes easily. But if this ordeal taught me anything, It was that standing up for what is right can inspire others to do the same. And so began a new chapter in Maple Grove, one where hope mingled with uncertainty, but also offered promise for a future where every voice mattered and harmony could thrive once again amidst our shared differences. The aftermath of the court ruling rippled through Maple Grove like a stone cast into a still pond. The verdict against Karen not only imposed significant financial penalties on her, but also sent shockwaves through the community, altering the dynamics of our neighborhood in ways I could never have anticipated. Karen was ordered to pay a hefty fine, which included compensation for damages incurred due to her reckless actions as well as additional penalties for the emotional distress I had endured throughout this ordeal. The financial burden weighed heavily on her, and it became clear that this was not just a personal loss. It was a public embarrassment that would follow her for some time. Word spread quickly about her defeat, and many residents who had once feared or respected her now viewed her with suspicion. In the weeks following the verdict, Karen withdrew from community events. Once the self-proclaimed guardian of order, she now seemed like a ghost haunting the very neighborhood she had tried so hard to control. Her absence created an unexpected vacuum of power and influence within the HOA. No longer did residents tiptoe around her. Instead, conversations shifted toward how we could foster a healthier community dynamic moving forward. As I interacted with my neighbors, I noticed an eagerness to engage in discussions about reforming the HOA. Those who had been silent critics of Karen's methods began speaking up, sharing their frustrations and calling for changes that would promote transparency and fairness. No longer were we merely passive participants in our neighborhood governance, we were ready to take ownership of it. I sought to facilitate these discussions by organizing community meetings focused on rebuilding trust within our HOA. During these gatherings, residents openly shared their concerns regarding rules that felt overly restrictive or inconsistently enforced. There was a sense of camaraderie as we brainstormed ideas for amending existing regulations to better reflect our collective values, an important step towards healing the rifts that had emerged during this conflict. Despite the positive shift in community dynamics, I couldn't ignore the lingering tension surrounding my interactions with the HOA. While I had won my case against Karen, my relationship with the association itself remained complicated. Some board members were supportive of my efforts to reform the organization, while others remained entrenched in their traditional views about maintaining strict adherence to rules at all costs. During one of our meetings, I found myself face-to-face with some board members who were wary of change. "We have to maintain standards," one board member insisted, their arms crossed defensively. "If we start making exceptions, where does it end?" Their resistance was disheartening. It reminded me that while progress was possible, it wouldn't come easily. Yet amid these challenges, I felt increasingly empowered to advocate for a more balanced approach to governance. Drawing on my experiences over the past few months, I highlighted how rules should enhance our quality of life rather than stifle it. I encouraged fellow residents to voice their opinions and share their own experiences with Karen's overreach, stories that echoed my own journey toward reclaiming agency within our community. As discussions continued and momentum built around reforming the HOA's practices, I couldn't help but feel that this incident had forever changed me. I had discovered a resilience within myself that I never knew existed, a willingness to stand up for what was right and fight against injustices that others might have chosen to accept quietly. While Karen's presence loomed large in our past, I realized that she no longer held power over us. We were now shaping our neighborhood's future together. The incident had transformed me from a passive homeowner into an active participant in creating a community that valued respect and accountability. In time, new proposals emerged from our community meetings, suggestions for clearer guidelines regarding property maintenance and enforcement procedures that prioritize communication over punitive measures. We even discussed establishing a peer review system for complaints made against homeowners, a way to ensure fairness and minimize misunderstandings caused by misinterpretations of rules. As these reforms began taking shape, my interactions with the HOA evolved into collaborative partnerships focused on fostering positive relationships among neighbors rather than enforcing rigid compliance. The transformation felt liberating. No longer did I fear confrontation, but instead looked forward to engaging in constructive dialogue about how we could collectively enhance our living environment. The repercussions faced by Karen served as powerful reminders of what happens when authority is wielded carelessly without regard for community sentiment. Her defeat became symbolic, not just of my personal victory, but also of our collective determination to reclaim our neighborhood from overly rigid interpretations of rules. Moving forward, I embraced my role as an advocate for change within Maple Grove, a place where voices mattered and every resident could contribute to a vibrant community spirit grounded in mutual respect. The journey ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges. However, armed with lessons learned from this ordeal and supported by fellow neighbors eager for progress, I felt ready to face whatever came next on this path toward creating a better Maple Grove for all. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon and bathe Maple Grove in a warm golden glow, I found myself reflecting on the tumultuous journey that had unfolded over the past several months. It was hard to believe how far we had come, from a neighborhood fraught with tension and fear to one that was beginning to embrace open dialogue and collaboration. The experience had transformed not just me, but also our community as a whole. Living in a community means navigating a delicate balance between rules and personal freedoms. When I first moved to Maple Grove, I viewed the Homeowners Association as a necessary framework designed to protect property values and maintain the aesthetic appeal of our neighborhood. However, my encounters with Karen reveal how easily rules can be manipulated, leading to an oppressive environment where fear replaced trust. I had learned firsthand that while guidelines are important, they must not come at the expense of individual rights or community spirit. The confrontation with Karen had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about authority and governance within our HOA. It was clear that unchecked power could lead to abuses and that those in positions of authority must remain accountable to the very people they serve. In my case, Karen's actions had crossed a line from enforcing standards into infringing upon my rights as a homeowner and neighbor. The line between maintaining order and stifling freedom is razor thin. It requires constant vigilance and open communication among residents. As I reflected on this balance, I recognized that rules should serve as guidelines rather than rigid barriers. They should foster a sense of belonging while encouraging personal expression. Our community's strength lies in its diversity. Each home reflects its owner's unique tastes, lifestyles, and aspirations. By respecting these differences rather than imposing uniformity, we create a more vibrant environment where everyone feels valued. One of the most profound lessons I learned during this ordeal was the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it feels daunting. Before my confrontation with Karen, I often hesitated to speak out against perceived injustices, fearing backlash or isolation. But through this experience, I discovered a resilience within myself and found strength in solidarity with my neighbors who shared similar frustrations. Together, we transformed our fears into action, an empowering reminder of how collective voices can bring about meaningful change. The newfound camaraderie among residents has invigorated our community spirit. Our discussions around reforming HOA practices have opened doors for dialogue that previously didn't exist. Neighbors who once avoided each other now engage in conversations about property maintenance, landscaping choices, and community events. We've begun to foster an environment where differing opinions are welcomed rather than stifled, a shift that can only strengthen our bonds moving forward. As we continue down this path of growth and transformation, I remain mindful of the challenges that lie ahead. While we've made significant strides in redefining our HOA's role within Maple Grove, resistance may still arise from those who prefer the status quo. It's crucial for us to remain vigilant against complacency. After all, change is rarely easy or swift. Open communication will be key as we navigate complex issues surrounding rules and regulations while ensuring everyone's voice is heard. Yet amid these challenges lies hope, a belief in our ability to shape our community into something greater than its past. The incident with Karen has become a catalyst for positive change. It has empowered residents to take ownership of their neighborhood rather than passively accept it. Ultimately, living in community means embracing both the privileges and responsibilities that come with it. It requires us to uphold standards while also respecting one another's freedoms, a balancing act that demands ongoing effort and commitment from all involved. As I sat on my porch watching families stroll by with children playing in their yards, I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for Maple Grove and its residents who stood up together against adversity. We may not always agree on everything, but we share a common goal: creating a neighborhood where everyone feels safe, respected, and proud to call home. With each passing day, I am reminded that true community is built on mutual understanding, respect for individual freedoms, and the willingness to engage in difficult conversations when necessary. As we move forward into this new chapter for Maple Grove, a chapter defined by unity rather than division, I'm excited about what lies ahead. Together, we are crafting a brighter future for ourselves, a place where rules enhance our lives instead of constraining them, where every resident has a voice, and where we celebrate both our differences and shared aspirations as neighbors committed to building something beautiful together. As I reflect on the journey that has unfolded in Maple Grove, I feel compelled to reach out to each of you. Whether you're a homeowner, a renter, or simply someone who cares about community living. The experiences we've navigated together are not unique to our neighborhood. They resonate across countless communities where homeowners associations exist. It's time to consider your own experiences and engage in meaningful dialogue about the importance of community communication and accountability. Many of us have encountered situations where rules and regulations feel overwhelming or unjust. Perhaps you faced scrutiny over a home improvement project that seemed harmless or received a notice for lawn maintenance that left you feeling frustrated. These incidents may seem minor, but they can accumulate, creating an environment of fear and resentment among neighbors. It's crucial to recognize that these feelings are valid and deserve attention. Community living should foster a sense of belonging, not anxiety. Open communication is the lifeblood of any thriving neighborhood. When residents feel empowered to voice their concerns and opinions, it creates an atmosphere of trust and mutual respect. If you've ever hesitated to speak up about an issue within your own association or felt intimidated by an overzealous board member, know that you are not alone. Many others share your sentiments, and addressing these challenges starts with initiating conversations. Take a moment to reflect on your community dynamics. Are there avenues for residents to express their concerns? Are board meetings accessible and transparent? If not, consider advocating for changes that promote inclusivity and open dialogue. Perhaps you could organize informal gatherings where neighbors can discuss issues or share ideas for improving the neighborhood. Initiatives like these can help build bridges between residents who may have felt isolated or unheard. Accountability is another essential component in fostering healthy community relationships. HOAs are ultimately meant to serve the interests of their members, each one of us who calls this place home. When authority figures act irresponsibly or abuse their power, it is essential for residents to hold them accountable. This doesn't mean engaging in conflict. Rather, it means approaching situations with a spirit of constructive criticism and collaboration. If you find yourself facing conflicts within your HOA, remember that resolution is possible through peaceful dialogue. Gather evidence, seek support from fellow residents, and don't shy away from addressing problematic behaviors head-on. Consider forming a committee focused on reviewing existing guidelines and suggesting amendments that reflect the values of your community. Working together toward common goals can create positive change without resorting to hostility. The story of my confrontation with Karen serves as a reminder that standing up against injustices can lead to meaningful transformations, not only for ourselves but also for our neighbors and future generations. Change often begins with one person willing to challenge the status quo, but requires collective effort to sustain it. So I urge you, don't let fear silence your voice. Take ownership of your role in your community. Whether it's advocating for better communication within your HOA, supporting fellow residents facing similar struggles, or even running for a position on the board, every action counts towards building a more inclusive environment. Let us strive to create neighborhoods where we celebrate individuality while respecting one another's rights. Communities thrive when we work together, not just when we enforce rules, but when we genuinely listen to each other's perspectives and foster understanding. In closing, I encourage all of you to take a step back and evaluate how you can contribute positively to your community's culture. Reflect on your experiences. What has worked well? What hasn't? Engage with your neighbors. Share stories about both successes and struggles. By doing so, we can empower each other to foster environments where everyone feels welcomed and valued. Together, let's advocate for accountability within our HOAs and nurture communities rooted in cooperation rather than discord. It's time to reclaim what it truly means to live in harmony, where rules enhance our lives instead of stifling them. The journey toward better communities starts with each one of us taking action, from small conversations to significant reforms, and ultimately working together toward a future where every resident feels heard, respected, and proud to call their neighborhood home.